mean, the backdrop to this press conference wasn't good for Reform, was it? It's hard to think of a more disastrous start to a Holyrood election campaign than the one Reform have had in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a complete disaster, hasn't it? If you're losing 5 candidates within the space of a week or so, then I think it's safe to say things are going very badly. And you know, the general theme here is that Reform, they have this charismatic leader at Westminster and Nigel Farage, but that you go a little bit deeper and you come up against a bunch of absolute bampots, and you would hope that at least the leader of the Scottish family, the Scottish party, would perhaps be a little bit above that. But as you said, the ridiculous jokes that he's telling at Burn Summer, it would appear that, in fact, Malcolm Offord is in danger of being seen as just another one of those bampots. And you do get the feeling that the wheels are kind of coming off the whole thing now a little bit for Reform. I thought it was interesting to hear that it almost feels like desperation that they're now falling back on immigration as the main kind of attack line and campaigning strategy. I would have said that probably the most interesting thing about Reform's Scottish offering was the fact that Malcolm Offord seemed to be much more concerned with appealing to Tory voters, probably on the economy, on tax cuts, on driving the economy. But you know, it kind of feels like everything's all getting a bit desperate now, where you have press conferences talking about, you know, potentially bringing back seemingly quite racist adverts about the Labour leader and othering this huge part of the population. It feels like they're going after a
core vote.
A core vote that I'm not even sure really exists in Scotland.
Doug, I mean, it's been a shambles, to say the least, the last fortnight. But do you think that will have any impact on how they do in the election, or do you think that it's priced in that they're not a professional outfit, and people give them more leeway than they do with other political parties?
First of all, I've got to take a wee bit of umbrage, John, that you know there isn't those Reform voters in Scotland, that core vote. I think that's a bit of Scottish exceptionalism there, the kind that we hear for the SNP all the time, that Scotland's this kind of...
The polls tell their own story. They're leading the polls in England, they're not leading them in Scotland.
But they're already leading it in England about 25%, they're polling here about 20%. You know, so, and the most recent poll suggests that the last few weeks haven't really had much of an effect on their support. It's kind of holding steady. They've taken over from Labour again in second place. But I think, to go back to your original point, Paul, or the question you asked me, is I actually do agree with that. It's been a shocking start for them. But I think behind the scenes, they might be like, could have been worse. You know, because there's other parties that are mired in sleaze at the moment as well. Rather helpfully, we talk about Reform losing 6 candidates. The SNP have now lost 4 candidates in dodgy circumstances, shall we say. Labour have lost 1 today. So they probably sit there and think, given that they're not a professional outfit, and I think that's part of their appeal. You know, that's part of the appeal to some voters.
They're not professional politicians.
Not professional politicians. That they say things that maybe others wouldn't say, or you shouldn't say, or you know, they're kind of not woke, if you want to use that awful term. And I think that's him today, going back to the immigration thing, is him on solid ground, even though, as we were discussing before we came on air, don't always think Malcolm Offord's particularly comfortable on immigration, because he's very much, I think, a businessman, a guy who...
I mean, when he was a Tory, he wanted more immigration to Scotland.
So he's a guy that's much more comfortable when he's talking about the economy, but immigration, according to surveys, it's a top 3 issue. It could be a top 3 issue at this election, even though, again, it's a reserved issue. We seem to be here every week banging on about reserved issues that Holyrood has no power over. Obviously, you know, public services, increased immigration puts pressure on that. That's got to be kind of dealt with. But it feels a bit like, you know, when John Swinney turns up at an independence march in Edinburgh. This was kind of the Malcolm Offord equivalent of trying to shore up that core vote, reminding people what the reform message is. That is less immigration, tightening borders, etc. And I do think support for reform is plateaued, but I don't think the last few weeks, and it has been dreadful for them. There's no point in kind of, let's not pretend here. I can't see that impacting on the vote, because part of why people are going to vote for them is because of what we've seen over the last few weeks.